So welcome everybody. My name is Alison Moulding, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a database that we've developed to track coral nursery restoration efforts. So why do we need a database? Well, as the field of restoration has continued to grow, there's a real need to gauge the distribution and the cumulative impacts of all the individual restoration efforts. A lot of people track their nursery efforts individually, but there's not a way to look at them on a broader spatial scale. So recognizing this need, the Coral Restoration Consortium Working Group developed a number of products to standardize and track restoration efforts. Sorry, this microphone is like right in my way. Right, can you still hear me? Okay. All right, so the first product that we developed was a coral restoration database as a way to track coral nurseries, outplant sites, and your restoration site monitoring. And then the other product that we developed was a coral restoration monitoring guide that identified some universal monitoring metrics that would provide a way for people to track their restoration efforts in a standardized way. We took all of the data that was submitted for this database and put it into a map that we put online on the Coral Restoration Consortium website. But we've always had the goal of making it broader and more accessible than just a map. And so what we did is we teamed up with the Nature Conservancy to actually put the whole database online and not just the map. The database that they've developed is called the Rehabilitation Portal, and this will replace the CRC restoration database that's currently on the CRC website. The purpose of this portal is to provide an open access online database where restoration practitioners can record, visualize, and share their coral restoration data. So the Rehabilitation Portal was developed through years of research and coordination. TNC reached out to a number of stakeholders to ask them about what they think would be the most useful content. Then they held a workshop where the workshop participants actually built a prototype of what that portal would look like. Then TNC contracted with a web development team to build out that content. We've done some internal testing, and now we are ready to present it here for the public launch of the website. So when you first go onto the website, there's a public-facing component that's just open to the general public that just gives some broad information about the information that's in the database. But to be able to take advantage of the full functionality of the portal, you need to create an account and log in. This will allow you to enter data and to see people's restoration data on a more detailed level. So the portal has two separate but related functions. The first is to service the tourism sector, so tourism operators and citizen scientists. And the second is to service the restoration practitioner community. The difference between these two groups is really just the level of detail and the amount of information that we ask people to report. So once you log in, you're able to input your data. So you can input information on your nursery, on your outplant sites, and your restoration site monitoring. The monitoring, I'm going to focus mostly in this presentation on the restoration practitioner side rather than the tour side, but they're very, very similar and compatible. So when you put in your monitoring data, those follow the universal monitoring metrics of the CRC restoration guide that I mentioned earlier. The portal will display georeference maps of all the sites. It also supports upload of documents, photos, and video links. One of the really cool features of the database, and what we're hoping is an incentive for people to use it, is that it does a number of data visualization products that can help you determine how your restoration site is doing. So it'll produce simple line and bar graphs of a number of metrics that people use to look at their restoration sites. And then you can download CSV files of both your tables relating to those analyses as well as your raw data. I should mention, I can't remember if I did already or not, but when you put in your data, you have the option to keep it private or to make it downloadable by other registered users. So if you're always able to download your own data, but downloading other people's data is dependent on what kind of permissions they've given. Next, I want to talk about the structure of the portal. And the structure is just a way to organize the information within the database. So at the highest level, we have a project. And a project is just a way to house all of your information in one place. Then we have sites within a project, so you can have nursery sites or restoration sites, and the data that, or the information that we collect on those two site types is different. And then finally, we have data about your sites. So the monitoring data or the outplant data is logged per monitoring date. So each date we call that an event. So for nursery monitoring data on a specific date, you would just log basically what species and the number of colonies are in your nursery. For restoration sites, we have two data types. The first is outplant data. This is basically just what corals you outplanted at your restoration site. And then we have restoration monitoring data. So at the sites that you outplanted, when you go back to monitor, you just record the CRC universal monitoring metrics. We have two different user types. We have project owners and project contributors. Project owners create projects and directly enter data into those projects. Project contributors are people that the owners give permission to access their projects and enter data. So for instance, if you had multiple people in your organization who collect and enter data, you could have one project owner and multiple contributors who could all submit data for that one project. So now I want to move into the types of information that we collect under all those different categories. I just want to mention now that there's a lot of information that the portal will support, but not all of these are required fields. So if you see something in there and you're like, oh, I don't really collect that, I can't enter my data, that's not true. We do have some very basic required fields that people have to submit, but it supports a lot broader data that's optional. So for nursery sites, we want to know if the nursery is an in-water nursery or if it's land-based. And if it's in-water, what type of structures you use. The location of the site, so that's both latitude and longitude, as well as the country and whether or not it's in a marine protected area. We want to know the date the nursery was established and how big it is. We have a number of drop-down lists in an effort to standardize data entry. So for depth and substrate types, those are both drop-down lists. And then finally, we want to know the corals in your nursery, the species, and what we're calling the assumed genotype, which is just whatever colony information you use to identify and track different colonies in your nursery. We call that assumed genotype. So we want to know basically what corals you keep in your nursery and whether or not you've done genetic analysis, and that's just a yes or no question. And then when you go back to monitor your nursery, this is just data that's a little more dynamic and apt to change through time. So on whatever specific date you're monitoring, whether your nursery is active or inactive, and by that we just mean, are you actively propagating corals for outplanting, or is for some reason is the nursery just not propagating corals at that time? If it is inactive, we have a whole list of reasons to choose from. And then we want to know what is in your nursery, basically the number of colonies by species and assumed genotype. And again, assumed genotype is just your colony tracking identification information. For an outplant at a restoration site, it's basically the what, where, and when of outplanting. So the latitude and longitude of your outplant site, as well as whether or not it's located in a marine protected area, the date of outplanting and the size of your outplant area. We have drop-down lists for depth, reef zone, and whether or not you plan to do monitoring both pre and post outplant, and then your main objective for outplanting at that site. We want to know the species that you outplanted, and then the number of colonies and size class per unique colony ID, which again is that assumed genotype. We have drop-down lists for what you outplanted on, whether it was natural hard bottom or if it was an artificial structure, and then your source of your outplants, for instance, if it was a nursery fragment or if it was larvally derived. For restoration monitoring, per monitoring date, we want to know how you collected your data, whether it was just all or a subset of either the colonies that you outplanted or the outplanted area. And then if it was just a subset of either the colonies or the outplanted area, we want to know the proportion. And those are important metrics for making sure the data visualizations are as accurate as they can be. And as I mentioned previously, the monitoring information is the CRC universal monitoring metrics. So it's per coral species. We want to know a count of the number of colonies per size class, and those are drop-down lists also. They're already identified. We want to know the number of colonies per live tissue category. And then finally, the ecological footprint, which is just the area that encompasses all your restored corals. And the purpose of that is to see how your restoration site has changed over time, whether it's changed in size due to mortality or possibly fragmentation and reattachment. As I mentioned, one of the really cool features is that the database will analyze automatically the monitoring data you enter and display simple line and bar graphs of trends over time for both your projects and your sites. So it'll make simple tables of things like live coral cover, abundance, density, survival, size class distribution, live tissue distribution, and the reef area restored. It'll also make simple tables of the number of colonies and species that you outplanted both at the site and project level. And then you can download both the raw data and the data tables relating to these analyses. Excuse me, my throat's getting a little scratchy. So the way you access the portal is reefrehabilitation.org. If you want to know more about the portal and actually come try it out, we have a workshop planned tomorrow at 9 a.m. If you didn't register prior to the conference for the workshop, please feel free to attend anyway. I think we really have a lot of space. So please come, check it out. I've put up my contact information there if you have any questions. Another good point of contact is Liz Shaver from the Nature Conservancy, because she's really done the bulk of the work in getting that portal online. So thank you for your time, and I think we have maybe a minute or two for questions if there are any.